with a round of applause.
Good morning, everyone. We planned this presentation a while ago, and then events keep coming and we shift. And we almost shifted, because of the SONA, but we decided to go ahead because on reflection, the most important economic news which anyone will present today in a position is on the economy, is on a fund program. We are locked into a fund program. So we thought we could put this also in that context and against the background of some of the things that we have been hearing, particularly since the second review. I'd like to draw your attention, especially the financial journalists. That is important to spend some. You don't have to look at the whole document. Article 4 and the review 2023, which was combined with the first review, is on the website. And you don't have to read the whole document. If you read what is sent to the executive directors at their board, which is, what starts is about 5 or so pages, then if you are minded, you can go into detail. They are prepared for, it's like what you would prepare for your executives, in your offices. So I take it that you would understand, so that sometimes it doesn't come across as something, we are saying something which is different. Almost all the tables that we are going to use today, apart from an earlier one, which I presented, short summary, is going to come from the Article 4 and the first review document. So we're going to be based our presentation on the Article 4, IMF sources. And it's important because I remember very well, current government took over the ECF for 2015, and in the course of its implementation, I even published an article. I thought Ghana was being compliant. If you look at of terms, conditions, and others, I also said, many of you, I can see faces here who have been in most of my presentations, that we were on a very slippery path because of the fiscal accounting measures that were being adopted, putting things in footnotes, in memoranda items, where previously they went to determine important things like what is the level of the deficit. So if you don't include arrears, the deficit is revenue minus expenditure, which gives us the first deficit, and then you add arrears, and then you get what you call the overall deficit. If you take anything out, if you flate anything there, it's complete misrepresentation. And this is what led to the Article 4, 2019, which revised our deficit figures, our overall balance figures, and revised our debt figures. The report was submitted whilst Parliament was in session, November, preparing for the 2020 budget, and no changes were made. Fortuitously, I would say fortuity, COVID came, and the gaps with the IMF identified in 2019 got subsumed completely by COVID. So COVID came, and we blamed everything on COVID. No correction was made, despite the 6 billion or so that flowed into the economy. a significant amount of money. We talked about US dollars. Now we are posting another warning because, and I said it even before the program started, that Ghana should move beyond the primary balance as the basis for saying that we are doing well. I'm saying, let me repeat again, that we are on a slippery path if we continue to use the primary balance, and I'll explain those terms. If we continue to use the primary balance as a means of determining our performance. And I'm not saying it because it's something which, I've left office, and so it's convenient to say no. We enshrine this in the public to use the fiscal balance and not the primary balance as fiscal anchor. That change was to come in 2017 because the law was passed in 2016. If you go to the 2015 budget, you will see that I had, on behalf of His Excellency the President then and Cabinet, asked the Controller and Accountant General to move from cash accounting to accrual accounting, at least semi-accrual accounting, and then treated the Institute of Chartered Accountants to come up with a standard for non-profit organizations in the country. Today, if this hotel prepares its accounts and files it, it's IFRS. Nobody questions it. So, big hotels, business, big business, multinational, they all use IFRS globally. Similarly, non-profits, including governments, which doesn't make profit, use what you call IFSAS, International Public Sector Accounting Standards. The second they use is the GFS, published by the Government Finance Assistance, published by the IMF, and the UN, for the FOCOC, the functional classifications. These are the standards that are used. And so we embedded this in the Public Financial Management Act. But let me say, to the benefit of my predecessors, from Dr. Botwe all the time, we were incrementally moving in that approach. And so if you take if you take the Financial Administration Act and the Financial Administration Regulations, which were replaced by the Public Financial Management Act, and our Honorable Osafoma Foments, you recall the sinking fund, which is what made the budget efficient. So with this background, proceed to the numbers. Okay. So we start by saying that many of Ghana's economic challenges are due to fiscal management. We have an ambitious expenditure, that is outflows, from the various initiatives, from fee HSS to everything. Of course, I can talk confident and free. I used to meet in this very hall. The controller, when we needed to review, because we have a large number of accountants. Now, so these reforms were meant to, create a buoyant revenue source, including VAT, and that would meet our expenditure needs, increase the revenue to meet our expenditure needs. Unfortunately, our revenue is very stagnant. You see it from the graphs when we start presenting. And therefore, the more, if your revenue is, ability to generate revenue is stagnant, let's say at 16%, you can be increasing. We are not at 16% actually. I'm talking about revenue maybe, but I think 15, but tax. The more you increase the expenditure, if your revenue is stagnant, it means your deficit. I mean, it's like having your salary, it's your income, right? So if you want to be a bit of a playboy, or some sickness comes in the house, or the income is fixed. For example, especially those of us who, and I've been on a public servant, on fixed income, you know what I'm talking about, which is why sometimes our wives and others, or we buy a taxi if we get money, start a small shop to complement. It's the same thing. So if you have a stagnant revenue, it means like a fixed income. So you can, your expenditure without widening your borrowing. and a gap. It's as simple as that. And that's where the primary balance and fiscal balance comes in. Many of these were discontinued. Today in the IMF program, you'll probably have time to read some of them. The government is being required as a conditionality to go back to accounts payable, something we started under GIFMIS called contract database. And I'll show you the evidence of it. Right? The government is being asked to go back to ITAS. You may have seen it, ITAS, that is a domestic income tax system, right? Which should have come immediately after single window, West Blue, if you remember, or now ICOMS, which replaced GCNet, and the rest. Many of these reforms were stalled for 7 years, and they have become a conditionality. The most disturbing one is we have an IMF program which the government said will be revenue focused. We did an option because we didn't want to do too much of legacy on the legacy expenditures and the rest. And the ITAX, which should have strengthened the consolidation of IRS and VAT service into one domestic tax division, has not been moving. And we are asking for more time in the program, in the review, to implement this. And I know for a fact, I used to be a GRS staff anyway. It was then called Revenue Secretariat. So I know for a fact that the tender was opened and closed about a year ago. Whatever is delaying this, nobody knows. Right? So these are the things that may come. Yes. So because of these challenges, high expenditures and stagnant revenue, we have a deficit which is very high. Now, hence, if we use the primary balance is a lower measure of your deficit than the fiscal balance. Note, I'm saying the primary balance is a lower measure of your deficit than if you use the fiscal balance. That is what we want to. We have said it here, and hopefully I'm expecting something maybe towards the end, to show from these are extras from the, But IMF is mindful of the fact that even though we've opted for primary balance, they keep promising the fiscal balance for us to see the difference. Right? Because they don't want to be seen to say, that ultimately, well, we can't say the IMF after all accepted it. It is in our memorandum of understanding, if that's what we want to use. And I've said that past ministers of finance have used it, and we now wanted to change to accrual basis. So now so it gives us, a bit of the background to what we are going to be discussing. We are saying that continuous use of the primary balance as fiscal anchor in the 2023 media review, that's when the announcement was made by the government. And we made a presentation, I think it was online, to say that it's a dangerous path that we are going to be on. It softens the fiscal objective and stance of the IMF ECF back in the 2023, the program we are talking about, and seriously undermines recent reforms, which were started in 2009. Okay. Now, why are we saying this? When you use the primary balance, I mentioned already, you exclude arrears. When you use in your expenditure, so you use a lower expenditure amount. Okay, are you following me? I'm saying that your deficit is your, your deficit is your revenue minus what? Your expenditure. But you also know that, like many of us, you've gone to borrow from an uncle, from some that's our parents who are more lenient, or from a friend, from the banks and in order. No matter households, businesses, governments, they borrow. And then you want to show off a bit, and somebody asks you, so how much money, do you have? So I have a lot of money in my pocket. And you don't say that money should be net of the amount that I went to borrow. You follow what I'm saying? Because it's due. Next weekend you have to pay. So you sit down over drinks and whatever, you want to show off a bit. The money that you have to go and use to borrow, you decide that, no, when I'm saying I have money, let me push the arrears aside. As for the borrowing, later I will sort it out. It's the same thing. So in calculating the primary balance, we take 1, arrears out. 2, we take interest payments out. Why do we do this? When we know that we have been doing it as Ghanaians already, that interest and compensation, if you remember, was taking all of the what? Tax revenue and then later total revenue. So why would we take it out when that is one of our big headaches? Why would we take arrears out in measuring our success? When, we have school feeding, arrears, everybody knows it. The government has IPP, arrears. The government, I can mention so many arrears. So why take arrears out in measuring success? Right? And then when you come to financing, you have to make past payments of loans. And yet you are not taking the provision you are making, which we call amortization or debt payment. Again, let me say that I'm not saying this because I find myself in a comfortable position today. But this is a precise reason why we said we want to move to accrual accounting. This is a precise reason we started a contract database. And this is a precise reason we put oil money aside, even in 2015, when crude oil prices, to pay down, through the sinking fund, to pay down the debt. Because we're beginning to identify the issues that hurt the Ghanaian economy. And beginning to find, successfully for us, again, that's positive for successfully for us, we discovered oil. Remember, the Mills administration came single spine and all those things. So despite all those challenges, the Petroleum Revenue Management Act was passed. And provisions were made in that act, in Parliament, including the current administration, to use part of the oil revenue, which is new to the budget, to address some of these issues. So that as a nation. Okay, so you remember when COVID came, the first money that was taken out was the stabilization fund. Right? So these are the reasons why we are saying that we are on a risky path where we ignore these 3 or 4 very important, issues that have been played. Yes. And we go up and say we are doing well. It's like pushing bailout costs under as a memorandum of footnote and saying that your deficit is excellent. Right. So this is what I've been explaining in table. I presented this, those of you who were here previously. That is your revenue, cash coming in. Item 2, your expenditure, cash going out. It ignores arrears. Okay? So you can measure your difference there, but if you don't, and then you take out interest, and then you come to the primary balance, that's what gives you the primary balance. You've left out interest, you've left out arrears, amount you are owing. Okay. So, the fiscal balance, I've been explaining this so we can move on. So now, in the Public Financial Management Act, in the Public Financial Management Act, we said we included terminology like accounting for liabilities, commitments, they are there. You can check. Okay. The more important one is that in the Fiscal Responsibility Act was passed in 2017, if you remember, which terms are similar to the PFMA, Public Financial Management Act. The current government quantified one item, and the item that was quantified is the fiscal balance, which includes arrears, includes interest. and pegged it at what figure? A certain percentage of GDP. 5%. Right? 5%. It's there. It's in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So why move away from the law, your own law, and then make the primary balance, the more important measure for performance? And the only difference with the PFMA is that the PFMA, let's see, the PFMA mentions it, right, but didn't quantify it. It mentions it, but it didn't quantify it because, it was going to be in regulations or because of certain conditions, the up and down of the economy was being considered. I've mentioned the role of ICA Ghana already, controller and the rest, so we can move on. So this is exactly, these are the objectives. Compliance, and this is from the PFMA, the Public Financial Management Act. And you will see this in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Is there? So you see the first one, compliance by government with the fiscal policy objectives, fiscal policy principles, and other requirements shall be assessed in accordance with the following indicators. And the first is the non-oil primary balance. So you see, the PFMA does not ignore the primary balance. Only it treats it as, a bit more inferior in terms of measurement of performance. And that's because we did cash accounting. Remember, cash in, cash out, right? So it mentions it there, right? Or non-oil fiscal balance. So the two. Why oil? Because oil prices go up and down, like the 2015 budget, when we had to use $99, and then crude oil prices fell to $35, even while the budget, was being read. Okay. And then any two of the following, that is the public debt as a percentage of GDP, capital spending, because we were not investing. Where almost all the money was going to consumption. So capital budget as a percentage of total expenditure. If you remember in the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, 70% went into the budget after GMPC, and 70% of that 70 went into investments in 4 sectors approved by Parliament. So the focus on investment is very important. And then revenue as a percentage of GDP, and the wage bill as a percentage of GDP. So you see the fiscal balance is out there, right, as a basic condition together with the primary balance before this one, any two. And so given our debt situation, an obvious one from the second category will be what? Will be debt. So now, any questions? Because we are going to now look at the numbers, which are used in the IMF Article 4, and to see, whether the current government or any other government that takes over, independent candidates, anything, whether we are really moving positively towards 2025. So any questions on the background, please? Okay, so I want to know, looking at the rebased economic figures that we are using, is it not only proper that we use Now, we are using the rebased economic figures. Now, is it only proper if we use the primary balance to make it work, rather than abandoning the rebase and then now coming to use fiscal balances in this regard? You see, if you use the primary balance, it's assumed that you are in full control of your arrears and you have made provision to pay your debt. So again, let's be personal. Let's use employees so that you don't go out and say Terkper is too technical. So, right, your salary was 3,000, right? That determined the basis for your condition of life, right? Then you had a salary increase to 3,500, right? Do you abandon? When you have had more money, rather, do you abandon your loan, the arrears that you are owing? Or you rather use it, as we did the PRMA, to make sure that you even go and clear, people would even go and clear the arrears, so that next time, they will be able to go back and borrow. And when I teach my students, I tell them, many of you, you know very well, your parents go to your uncle, they go to a friend, they go to borrow, to take us to school. Many of us went through that, right? But if your mother borrows, as mine did, God bless her today, and for semester 1, and doesn't pay for semester 2, you sit at home. If your father gets a salary increase and doesn't envision that, oh, I must even go and borrow less, we're going to have a higher salary, so that we can, no, it's a fallacy. And I don't know where that is coming from at all. It should make us more responsible. Our rebasing only says that services, first it was services, has expanded such that it overtook agric. And those who follow me on X or Twitter, we've been going through this week. Okay? It says that the GDP has expanded. Why? Because services have expanded. And services has now overtaken agric as the main source of income for the economy. So again, as I've been arguing on Twitter, what is the new economy? Financial services, mobile, that is MTN, and those are the new economy. The services, when we talk about the services sector, which also generates other more and more services. Okay? So it's not so much a question of saying, don't bring yield levy into the tax system. It is the structure of yield levy which is wrong. It is not the fact that you want to cover new economy, which is why we brought the non-core financial services. Otherwise, those of you whose parents are cocoa farmers or our brothers and are in the village, you are saying that they should continue to be producing, cocoa, you become crash it. So, you know how to use mobile phone, you don't want to pay tax. And we continue paying them, old economy. So it is even more relevant that we should, since the rebase economy means that we are getting more money, we should use that part of that additional money, which is not going into that new money, which is not going to be consumption expenditure, to begin to plan for payment of proper arrears. What does arrears mean? Contractors, IPPs. And what does that also mean? Doomsor, right? Potholes and the rest. So it should rather make us, and that's why when your GDP increases, you become a middle income country. You have to borrow at a higher cost, right? It's like you finish school and then you keep worrying your uncle. You say, hey, go and be responsible. And your uncle who was generous enough to be helping you, he'll be watching you. I'll be helping you. National service, I'll be helping you, right? But he doesn't hate you when you start earning salary and you keep coming. He'll tell you, go and manage. Okay. So this is a reproduction. It's in Article 4. You can go and, it's somewhere out there. You can see it. So I've reproduced the nominal numbers, and we have the total revenue. And then instead of expenditure, we have primary expenditure. And then they give a footnote, you see it later, and say, hey, this is not your total expenditure. Right? This expenditure does not include what? Interest payments. Okay? So previously, you calculated your deficit, right, as a difference between what? Revenue, total revenue, minus what? Total expenditure. The economy is expanding, yes, so we expect that you have more money and you'll be disciplined. Okay? You are not a country that has gone to the default. We are already going to default, so it means that we need more money, to take those who are our creditors off our back, and rather you exclude interest payment that is due to them, and say you are doing well. Are you following my logic? Yeah, your problem is debt. Your problem is that you are default, including pensioners, including pension funds and the rest, haircuts and all that, right? And the second most important element of the debt, debt is principal plus what? The interest. Because I won't give you the money we want to charge. The second most important element you've taken out, and you say, I'm doing well. When you've defaulted, then you should be increasing revenue so that you can pay and can go back to the markets and borrow and stop relying on only treasury bills. It's as simple as that. So this means that you are not doing more to get out of that situation. You are not doing more to get out of that situation. And you will see what I'm talking about. So it's even here. Where's the light, please? Okay, so you can see, if you use the primary balance, by the way, if you can see the figures from far, we have the 2022 budget and then the actual. And then we have the 2023 budget and then the actual. And then we have the 2024 budget, which is the current one, which is a projection. So it's just a projection of what we expect to get. Okay? And you have that. And then you go to 2025 and you are going to the medium term because the IMF program goes into 3 years. All right? Now, according to this, the expenditure, okay, you can see with the red, the expenditure without interest takes you out of the red by 2024, this year. Black means that you are money in your pocket. The red means there's a little hole there which is taking it. Are you following me? So the measure we've agreed suggests that by this year, we should be getting very comfortable. Right? But you forget that you are getting this, and we'll come to it, because you've taken out interest payment, which has been put as a memorandum or a footnote. You remember bailout costs and all that, and the squandering of ESLA. Are you following my argument? So you are doing well because what is below interest has been taken out and made, a footnote. Okay? And your domestic, and they are big figures. In the year in which we say that we are doing well, we have deferred interest payments, if all is included, of about 66.91, which is equivalent to the budget deficit. Right? So yesterday in the SONA, a lot of quoting of primary balance, that we are doing well. This is the same table as a percentage of GDP, because and that comes back to the only question. When you say I'm doing well because you are showing, the nominal amount, that you, so let me be practical again. When your salary was 3,000, right, and you were making maybe a payment of 1,000 of a loan or something, right? That's 1/3. When your salary increases, just for simplicity, doubles, your ability to pay becomes stronger, right? So instead of 1,000, so you can even double it. Your salary has doubled, so you can decide to pay faster. But rather say, I'm doing well. So you take out the interest and say, I'm doing well because I'm meeting the current interest. Yeah, it's comfortable. You can easily meet, because the economy has grown, right? So you borrow and borrow and borrow, and then you get to default because you've ignored arrears and you've ignored, the debt repayment. Okay? So again, and this is what I'm saying. We agreed with the IMF primary balance. So you see what they've done? Okay, no, this is the interest. We'll come to that. Table. Okay, so this is what we are talking about. So the yellow, look to the right, top. The yellow, the top, like ash, is the primary balance. And you see by 2024, it has crossed, look at the right, in the axis. You see that it has turned positive. It has moved out of the red. But immediately you add the interest, everything is in the red zone. That's the yellow one. Okay, if I may just get closer. I'm saying that this top one is the primary balance, and we are looking at the deficit here. This side is measuring, the revenue and the expenditure. So, okay, so I'm saying that if you take out interest, your balance, since you started the program, will start from the red, but if we do well this year, and we say we are doing well, at the end of this year, you will be in the out of the red. Okay, you'll be out of the red. Yeah, and the government will say we are doing well. But immediately you add the interest which you took out. And remember, we are not even talking about arrears yet. Immediately you add the interest which you took out, you are back deep in the red. Okay? And that's why we say that we need to. And you see that by the end the program is ending, a year after, 2028, we are still in the red, around 5%, which is the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the, ratio. Right? That is because as a developing country, we will always be in the red, but the red must be what? Lower. Right? So if we are ambitious, and we are careless, you will see that we'll sink, and this was what was happening with the exclusion of other items. We thought we were doing well, when in actual fact we were not doing well. That's the warning that we are posting now. It could be that we'll do well, that's fair enough. So another representation is here. You can see we've separated the fiscal balances from the primary balance. So you see the primary balance starts, with a blue, negative, and then it's above positive, because we've removed the right side so that it becomes more clearer. And then you see your other balances, your deficits, down, deep in the red. Okay. So again, this is the same thing. Okay. Now we'll go to an interesting one. Yes, this one. So it's from the same table. So after you start with the IMF and they have assessed you and you are doing well on your primary balance, then they do another table as a caution. Right? Because they will be discussing with you that the primary balance may not resolve all your problems. Okay? So in agreement, they show it. So here, they show the primary balance without interest. They show the primary balance, okay, without interest. And then they show below it the overall balance. Primary balance cash basis, and then overall balance, that is overall balance which includes your arrears, includes interest. They show you that. For you to be aware that you may be meeting your primary balance, but you may not be covering your arrears. You may not be generating enough revenue to pay arrears. Salary arrears, as I said, school feeding, IPPs, and all that. Okay. So, and then they show you your public sector debt. These are tables from the, from the program, from the IMF report. So they are not government, well agreed with the government. Okay. So, this is what we saw. This is the fiscal balance on a commitment basis. So what you have here is, now this one, we graphed it. So the bars, the solid ones, show you your arrears. Right? Your solid ones shows you the arrears. And so the difference between the blue and the gray is arrears, which you left out. Okay. So that is that table. This is a more interesting one. You see, you are flying like a kite. The top one, primary balance, right? But you are deep in the sea when you graph the fiscal balances. Fiscal balance without arrears and fiscal balance with arrears. You see, it's deep. Okay, are we following? Please, if you don't, you can stop me. And so when we analyze the next review or we look and read, we should be cognizant of the fact that some measures are qualified. And the fact that we are doing well may not necessarily mean. If we're doing the primary balance, we're good at indicating that we are doing well, I can assure you that we would have settled the domestic debt and would have started issuing 3-year bonds. Again. But because the primary balance is not adequate, because what is keeping you out of the market is because you are owing them. You are owing them not just interest, but you are owing principal. So the primary balance is not enough. You have to do more, And we haven't even added debt repayment here. We are only talking about arrears. So the tendency to leave out arrears, whether it's bailout costs, whether it is FinSec costs and others, and say we are doing well, has hurt us before. And we must be very mindful, that it could hurt us again. Because we've only changed the terminology from memorandum, and footnotes to what? Primary balance. And we are saying we're doing well. Yes. You had a question? You are sovereign. The answer is that you are sovereign. No, the answer is that you are sovereign, right? And actually, the primary balance, as I said, is used by many countries that have a way of controlling their arrears. And you see, it's also influenced faster by growth. So those of you follow me on X, my good friend Theo Achampon put something out there, and his discussion was more on the macroeconomic side. And he was saying that many African countries are having problems, because of lack of growth, and we need to do more to grow. Yes, if you have COVID, you have those difficulties. But then my response was, okay, take Ghana. We grew. The services sector grew. He picked up as the service sector grew, right? Then we had oil, and we grew. And then commodity prices went up, and we grew to the point where we rebase, right? And we say we are going to be a 1 trillion economy. Is that not it? Right? And you cannot pay your debt. So that's why I was saying that, yes, we have missed, and that when we talk about the African lions, I was then a deputy. Ghana was one. I was invited to many of those workshops as to how the 8 or so countries which were being called African lions, today many of them, Kenya and the rest, are struggling. It's only Botswana, and some of the Spanish-speaking countries. So that would be so you are sovereign. What they can do is to add the fiscal balance. For you to see that even though you are using the primary balance, you may not be doing so well, so great. I'm saying we are on a slippery path because a little slippage, right? This is negative. A little slippage, it's like, okay, let me use the fiscal balance again. It's like, remember we said we were doing 4.9, 5.8, and we're doing well. Then came 2019, and the gap was identified, which was saved by COVID, right? And then we turned out by 2021, 2022, the Bank of Ghana was financing the deficit. We were not doing well, so well after all. And I'm saying that slippage could come again if we do not generate more revenue or cut expenditure to be able to narrow the fiscal balance. That is the more important one, not the primary balance. With a little effort, you meet your primary balance. Yes. It's not just this. Yeah, okay. Wait, no, it's not just this government. Let me correct you. It's not just this government. We have used the primary balance as fiscal anchor because that's the international norm. But as I said, it became apparent that it wasn't helping us, and the countries that are doing well look beyond the primary balance, right? So it's like a sprinter. You scored first. You became complacent, and you stopped training. Somebody will overtake you. And that's how many African countries are overtaking us now. Right? We are running out of breath, or we've run out of breath, and defaulted. So let's finish the presentation, and then we can come back. You know, I hate to, but we are almost, most of this. This is the main theme, and I'm glad that, you know, we are following what I'm talking about. You know, so we should manage arrears well, and if you borrow, you must learn to pay. If you borrow, you must learn to pay. There's no room, whether for households, for businesses, or for government, that you can keep on borrowing and not run into trouble. Right? Which is why, you know, we, in our collective wisdom, and I'm saying that it's not just one government or the parliament, right, decided that we should allocate some money to pay down debt. We should allocate some money, stabilization fund, so that when cocoa prices are high, gold prices are high. At the moment, gold prices are high, right? We should put some aside. It's like when you have a bonus, you don't chop all. You put some, you know, aside, because your son will fall sick, your daughter will fall sick. I mean, they are innocent, you know, they are vulnerable. So you have something, so that you don't go and borrow. And then your next door neighbor will be wondering, this man there, he didn't come for money. You see, you know, in your back. Okay, so let's, in fact, we've done, so why am I emphasizing the inclusion of arrears? As I said, we have always had an arrears problem, right? And that is because when we prepare the budget and we make allocation, this is how the arrears was being calculated. During the budget hearing, we asked the ministries to come with payments that are falling due but not paid, right? And then for 6 months. So we calculate backwards to 6 months. And so all the disclosures are made, we compile it. And then we compare the provision that we made the previous year. And the current year will always be high because of inflation and other factors. You deduct the two, and that is the net balance. Now, whilst you are basing your arrears on 6 months, 4 to 6 months, right, you have awarded a road contract. They didn't bring figures on that. Part of the road has been completed, certified, but they know there's no money in Ministry of Finance. So that certificate is sitting there in the Ministry of Roads and Highways, the infrastructure ministries. That did not come into your preparation of the annual budget because you cut it to 6 months. The ideal thing is that those should be part of the medium term. Because then you should know that, hey, you are constructing a road which will last the next 2 years. Don't go and award a new contract. But the only way you can tell a ministry not to award new contracts is if you have the information. You didn't have a database. To give information on the contract awarded, give you information, you know, on what has been, even there's variation that is made. So the original contract sum will change, right? So as part of the gift mix, we set about to analyze the amount which government is owing. This is where the word pipeline comes in. You remember pipeline, right? Pay attention to the pipeline. Both parties are now talking about. And that's because there's a better, it's not perfect, but a better way of determining because of that contract database, which was started in 2010. Okay, I won't go through the process. So, to get over all of this headache of not determining arrears and the rest, what was done in the Ministry of Finance was that when a file comes for payment, right, you have to attach information on the contract. So these are a number of contracts that we have in the system. Okay, that's the first column. And these are the ministries' under administration, the ministries under economic, we didn't produce the whole thing. It's for all the ministries. So we just chose the heading. So we have 819 contracts all over, big, small, school buildings, hospitals, roads, they are all there. Okay. And remember, this does not include wages, arrears, and the rest. These are just contracts. Because it's called a contract database. So it determines the contract sum, how much, at what value was the contract awarded. It tells you the variation that was made, that amount, and then you add it. And so the revised contract sum is 38. So now we have value. We are not talking about numbers anymore. This is a value in the books of the sector ministry, which Ministry of Finance didn't used to have. And then, out of this is the amount you paid, and this is outstanding. Okay? So, you can see that you had 39. The variation, I think, must be negative, is 38 billion Ghana cedis. And then you were able to pay only 3 billion. So you are sitting on 35 billion. This was for 2021. Right? Now this should tell you clearly, because the provision made for arrears in the budget, based on the 6 months, would have been 3 billion. But it should prick you that you have pipeline of contracts standing of about 40 billion. And you have paid, so 35 billion will come in to be paid. So why award new contracts? With this information. And this is how countries perfect, their budgets. Okay. So this 2021, what I showed you compared to 2022, this percentage of, in percentage, the value is a percentage of GDP or something. Okay. Now, percent of total, let's just move on quickly. I left out one table. Okay, there was one table where it compared, I don't know, it slipped. And the value of 30-something had jumped to 77 billion. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about an official report. Right? This was the difference in 2000, if you remember 2017, when it was said that the NDC had left, a significant amount of arrears. No, they were pipeline, they had never been accounted for. But it was now going to be, this data was going to be now put into the GIFMIS to support whether a ministry can award a new contract or cannot award a new contract. And the total amount now has moved from 13 billion back then to 77 billion, out of which some payment was made and it's left to 53 billion. I'm bringing this example from official records to tell you why I'm saying that it's dangerous to leave out, arrears in the computation of anything. Because, mind you, I lived through 8 years of single span. It was arrears. And it was then that we decided that we must. Because whilst we were battling with that arrears, energy sector that was also, and the whole country, ESLA, was to be used to pay the IPPs. Right? So we have to take arrears seriously, as a nation. This is a percentage of GDP. So we can even, so you can see in 2021, it came to 12.28, right? This is close, the amount here is close to your total tax revenue. The amount in the pipeline is close to your whole total tax revenue in percentage of GDP. And it requires that we sit down and look at it and find a solution to it, not hide it under the rug. Okay. So, so those are the percentages. It tells you 8.7, variation increases to 9.04. But something interesting has been happening. And so we are getting to the end. I'm using this as an illustration. So the recent annual performance report, that's how it is called, and this should have gone to Parliament annually. It had to come out because it's being prepared, Ministry of Finance, it had to come out because of the IMF program. You have to disclose. Okay? So it went into the debt sustainability analysis. That's part of the IMF program. And the arrears between these two periods, 2021, declined. So this was a government that couldn't meet its commitments. So the question is, where did the money come from to make these payments? Or where did, the amount go? And then reading more and more documents. So you see the negotiation and the difficulty. Yes. So if you have the impression that government has cleared most arrears by looking at only that report, you'll be mistaken. Okay. And this fact itself became obvious because IMF notes in its DSA, the debt sustainability analysis, that Ghana's public debt includes the following: the stock of domestic arrears owing to suppliers estimated at 4.4% of GDP. Okay, so this was shifting cultivation. Just shift it from arrears and then you move it into debt. It doesn't go away. Okay, and I'm quoting official figures, including 1.7% of GDP of reconciled debt to independent power and gas producers. And yet we had ESLA. We characterized ESLA. And we are blaming take or pay. And all of us are debating and arguing take or pay. Why did we push this into this? Okay. So it's up to us to see whether, you see why debt ballooned from about 70% official to over 100%, right? You reduce arrears, but debt increases. Just like cocoa board debt and all those things. Okay. A medium-term clearance plan of these arrears is incorporated in the baseline as part of the above-the-line spending projects. Now they go on, cocoa board bills issued domestically by cocoa board, a large SOE operating on non-commercial terms and largely engaging in quasi-fiscal was also added. Okay. So, having solved that riddle, we now know that the arrears were not paid, they did not go away, and therefore they remain. Okay? By which of the new governments take over, it is there. Okay. Now, paragraph 23, government projects contracts in 2022. Government executed across all covered entities, this from our own report, 2,084 projects. So I was even mistaken, 2,084 projects at various stages of completion with an initial contract sum of 37.96 billion. The revised, remember 37 of contract is equal to the deficit for that year. You remember that 37 figure. The revised total, but it wasn't added, it is not the result of the deficit. The revised total contract sum amounted to 39.2, as I was saying. And then paragraph 24, total cumulative payments reported on all projects at the end of December amount to 21 out of 77 billion, leaving about 50 billion. Okay, established enough. I've given references which you can use. Okay, today we won't go into the macros in detail, but we have just the inflation because we want to spend time on this, and if you have any questions on it, so now. But I always like the graphs. This is where we are as far as inflation is concerned. And those of us who have been following us, you'll see that what is normally published is that they will show the increase from 2020, just that segment, leaving this, and then show how well we are doing in reducing inflation. forgetting where we came from. You know, so who sent it up before bringing it down? Becomes a question. Okay, so for today, let's focus, you know, on, you know, the slippery road that is leaving arrears and not focusing on debt in the, yeah. Okay, so we can open the floor now for further.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Seth Terkper. At this point, we would allow you to ask questions if you have any question to ask. You raise your hand, and then we'll come to you with a mic, and then you mention your name, your media house, and then you pose your question. I think there's a hand here.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Elon from Economic Times. Honorable, how do we recover from the slippery path that we're talking about? Secondly, what is the nominal arrears to our GDP? And thirdly, what is the total bill which has fallen and has not been paid? Thank you.
I don't have the current. That's what I showed you. There's a report which Minister of Finance publishes. I've not seen the 2023 one because I like to be authentic. You know, so we don't have it. But if you take even the previous ones that we were talking about, you see the payables amount. Yeah. So you can compare with the figures that we were talking about. We were talking about 12% or whatever. So we are not making enough provision, you know, even into the medium term. So the medium term does not even cover. If with your knowledge of the contracts that we have awarded now, you can see that we are not making enough provision. And it will catch up with us like single span. What's the second question? Yes. If you take it, then it's what's in the budget. But then if you take other reports and you come out, you know, then I'm okay with, you know, discussing this because the initiative was launched in order that Ghana can get, you know, when I was a deputy and when I became a minister. So this is supposed to be part of GIFMIS. So I can't give you because the report is not out. We could have an idea. I'm sure it's buried somewhere in the Article 4. And a new DSA. So how do we recover from you just have to put money aside, cut expenditure, right? I mean, there's no easy way. If you are lucky and you have, you know, revenue, additional revenue, bonanza, that's why we set out the stabilization fund. Don't chop all, in quote. Put some aside because you have problems. So I think it's what we did in the past. Recognizing that we've always had you know, ups and downs in the economy, cocoa price goes up, or you know, better say chocolate prices go up, cocoa demand goes, you know, up, chocolate prices go down in the advanced economies that consume a lot of, then it goes down. So when the price goes up, put some aside. That's the stabilization fund. So I can go back and tell you the policies as we envisage. And there's no country which is doing well on the markets without managing debt. And that's why we set up the stabilization fund, the sinking fund. And then you must have a vehicle to borrow, which is why the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. And government cannot finance everything. So EXIM was set up. And the idea behind EXIM is that, you know, like Cocoa Board, the non-traditional export sector would also have, you know, an agency that can ring fence their revenue, and like Cocoa Board buys, you know, fertilizer and other inputs, the same thing, except that now it will be in control of the private sector, the board, the policy, because AGI and others are on the board. And they are going to be the main beneficiaries. Yeah.
All right.
So it requires just planning.
My name is Winston Taki of Joy Business. Until last month, when we saw inflation kind of coming up a bit, yesterday the President of the Republic announced the payment of funds to contractors. And the analysis of election-related expenditure was quite prevalent last year now, and continuously we're going to be hearing that much more in the course of the year. My question has to do with this amounts of monies being released into the system. Can the Bank of Ghana still maintain policy and also the rate of inflation going forward? And how would the market react onwards? Thank you.
Quite loaded, but let's say that we have to bring down inflation. We all know that. It's in our pockets, you know, and everything. And let's note that the steep fall in inflation that we are seeing is a result of zero, among others, right? And that's the result. So obviously, if you're in a program that, you know, blocks that, of course, we also did zero financing and other measures. So the trend is good for the country, right? But we do have some way to go, right? When it comes to domestic debt, I'm happy that, you know, the pensioners, when you talk about payment of the bond, the pension holders and the rest, it only means that the pensions and haircuts and things, the promise that was made that, you know, at least the interest will be paid. If not, your whole principle is what is being met, which is good for the market. Because if the trend continues, that's the only way in which you can stop relying on treasury bills. You can go back to borrowing, you know, from the markets, longer-term bonds to support the deficit. Why am I saying that? If you look at what actually goes on, the big amount that is mentioned for treasury bills has two components. The first component, right, and we don't have market for T-bills. That's why we started a stock exchange initiative. Because if my 3-year, okay, let me tell you the rationale. If my 3-year bond falls due, previously, government had to provide money for me to get my money back if I don't want to continue lending to the government. But when you put it on the stock exchange, it becomes a commodity. That bond is a commodity, right? Once you are broke and therefore you need your money from government, somebody has had a bonus and he wants to save. So it creates an outside government, except that government must be watching, because after all, it's government that is fueling. It's a loan, it's a debt. So government, that's how come we did a 2015 World Bank bond. A substantial portion was used to pay off the first sovereign bond and domestic bonds, which we had issued for single prime. And that is what made government credible, that, oh, after all, government can pay. And so you saw even foreigners coming into our market and giving us money, right? So, short answer, we just have to go back to some of these things that worked for us. We cannot sustain the economy on treasury bills. I've said that. We are increasing the public debt, you know, because we don't have. So that's what we are doing. Something seems. So this is what, again, this is from the fund, you know, program. And this is the projected debt path, right? Now you see what the fund is saying by 2028, agreed with the government anyway, that by 2028, because of this habit of not paying and rolling over, even when our hands have been bent, our debt to GDP will be 72. We are still out of the market by 2028. So we have to just be disciplined in handling many of those things. This is from the same report, right? So the same report. So, I mean, my ladies and gentlemen here, let's go deeper into the reports and not be fixated on just the current developments which are positive and whatever. It's only then that will not be taken by surprise.
The use of the primary balance, what does it do to new administrations? Because I know that with the primary balance, I might leave certain payments behind for a new administration. Is it not making the incumbent a bit not wanting to live or save and leaving all these arrears for the new administration.
And that's why we must talk about it. That's why we're talking about it. All right? Because remember, going to 2022, similarly, we're doing well, you know, and then and the fund is there. You know, please. I notice that sometimes the government goes on a defensive when you say that the conditions were there already, you know, before, you know, COVID. It's there. The fund talks about pre-existing conditions. And when they talk about pre-existing conditions, they are referring to that. So as a nation, we would have to just do more research, you know, further out, and judge for themselves whether we are doing well or not. There's the 2014 being election year is being made to look good, you know, 2024, sorry, and then to hand over. Of course, we didn't do that. Our deficit was 6.1%, you know, decent, just 1.1 above the 5%. And then our debt to GDP ratio was about, approximately 57%. It's over 100%. And we are not even planning to get to that level. Any more questions?
Okay, my name is Dodo Fuad with Nova.
Gentleman Fuad, how are you?
Okay, so currently the government is using primary balance as its fiscal anchor, as against the fiscal balance, which gives a clearer picture of the deficit and how well it is managing it. But that's because it has an option to do so in the PFMA Act. So I want to know, would you recommend that there's a review of the PFMA Act that would compel government to use the fiscal?
And there it is 5%. Not primary balance, fiscal balance. So the Fiscal Responsibility Act, that was the fiscal balance. It didn't quantify primary balance. You know, so it followed the notion that we should be moving and take, you know, arrears into account in a very serious way. So it's in the law. It's in the law passed by the government. And let me correct, again, I said it. The primary balance as a fiscal anchor is used globally. It's used, you know, by the, you know, I'm saying my position and his personal one, it's not good for developing countries because we do cash accounting and it makes us complacent. Because cash in, cash out, and we are living arrears. We don't have a comprehensive arrears database. You know, even debt, thanks to the Commonwealth, we have that. But if you don't have the intermediate arrears, you don't know, that just hits you because you are borrowing and borrowing.
Okay, so I get your point, but then when you look at the act, okay, and then you made mention of it, the fiscal indicators, there's a non-oil primary balance and then a non-oil fiscal balance, and then any other two fiscal indicators. So that gives the government an option, either to use the primary balance or the fiscal.
Well, then we always get to, sorry, but if in fiscal you remain fixated on only one criteria, right? It's either because it's favoring you and, you know, therefore, and then you drop it when it doesn't favor you. Because you are not in total control of your fiscal, just as we've learned painfully. So it should be comprehensive, and that's why all the fight. And in the Public Financial Management Act, the minister is supposed to report, it used to be administrative, on the fiscal strategy document to avoid these slippages. You know, government needs some flexibility to operate, but that flexibility should also not be, you know, reason why, you know, things should, yeah. So I think the best approach, and that's why, you know, that's why the gift miss, if you add the revenue modernization from GRA, which comes in, it's a complete system, you know, all the way to, so that at any point you are watching, you know, all the indices. Some will be positive, some will be negative, so you have brainstorming, and that's why the mid-year review was made compulsory to report on these indices and the rest. Yeah.
Hello. Hello. My name is Francis. I'm with the Ghana News Agency. I'm here. Francis with the Ghana News Agency. Between 2017 and 2021, Ghana had borrowed about $11 billion from the Eurobond market, adding to our existing debts, and eventually we being out of the capital market. Eventually, we've gone to the IMF for a loan support program. You just indicate that if you borrow, you must find a way to pay. With where Ghana finds itself, what do you think could be some of the pathways that we can use to pay our debts and ensure that we actually do not go back to the situation of borrowing and being in the capacity not to pay? I also want you to speak on Ghana's program so far. What is your assessment from the period that we've had the staff level agreement to having our 2 tranches of 1.2 billion? What is your assessment in terms of what the IMF program has done to Ghana's economy?
At this point, to get us out of where we are, stay tuned for homegrown policy Mark II. You know, because most of the measures that were introduced, and frankly, they are, if we have time, they have become conditionalities. That's what I'm saying. Accounts payable is a conditionality for us to, so if the fund is not saying, even though it's using primary balance, it knows that arrears is still a major risk. And so it's saying, let's have sight of the accounts payable and how you plan. Remember our own discussions with, labor, who, secondary, Senchi, because we were borrowing to pay this. Right, we agreed to pay over 3 years and we paid. Otherwise, you would continue, borrowing. As I said, what actually pushed the sinking fund more than anything was that then this was, with hindsight, you might think that maybe it wasn't under well and all that. But I was confident. But by 2014, we were 3 years away after winning that elections to cough 750 million in October to pay for the first sovereign bond. We only pay in interest. That's one of the motivations. The second one was the fact that we couldn't continue borrowing to pay single span arrears. So 2015, that's when we took the World Bank 1 billion. This was the first time restructuring of debt has been done. We did it in a different way. So we borrowed from the World Bank 1 billion and said we'll repay over 15 years, right? But we are not going to wait for 15 years, like the 10 years, we waited and it was looming. We have set up a sinking fund and we shall be using it to be reducing our debt every year. So that by the 15th year, we will repay the principal. If the economy grows, GDP, right, and the primary balance is exceeded and we have money, you can decide to roll over. That's the policy we did. So the World Bank guaranteed loan, it didn't go into consumption. The only part that went into the budget was a portion to pay counterpart funds. Counterpart funds means that, a foreign government has given you money to construct a road, to my village, right? But because they want your commitment, they will say, we'll give you 80% of the contract sum as loan. You raise 20%. And because we were preoccupied with doing so, single spine, we couldn't raise the counterpart fund. So we had cheap loans that we couldn't utilize, which would minimize the debt. So we used, I believe 200 or 250 million of that money, to pay for the counterpart funds, and it led to part of the secret behind the infrastructure projects that we did, many of them, as well as the schools and hospitals. Right? So it's just a matter of debt management. So we set up a debt, the Public Financial Management Act out of that experience says Ghana should establish a debt management office to manage its debt. Right, so, ladies and gentlemen, the point I'm making is that it's It's heaters. Remember the first time was HIPIC? We almost went into it, 2017 without a sinking fund. And so the success of it is that 550 million of our own oil revenue, not the bond, of our own oil revenue was used to pay off the part of the first sovereign bond. And the remaining 200 was refinanced under the World Bank, 550, In fact, we used about 300 or something, 350. The remaining balance of 200 was used by the current government, October 4th, 2017. There's a picture there. Even ESLA won a prize, to pay off the balance of the Kufuor bond. That's how it didn't burden us. So, back to your question, there's no easy answer. It's like we can all decide to eat well, dress well, and whatever, but you sacrifice those things to build a house, to buy furniture. It's just the same with government. Otherwise, you'll be locked out of the market. So the answer is in repayment. Oh, I have assessed it, and this is my caution which I'm discussing. No, I've assessed it. You can see my yellow marks.
Okay, so we just made mention that by 2027, we're still going to be having our GDP around 72%. Now, the government over...
Debt to GDP ratio.
Yes, government over the period has not been reporting, as you say, the debts, we talk of ESLA and the others, arrears, which are being put into the footnotes. Again, the Fiscal Responsibility Act is also looking at that 5% set aside. What can be done so that by the medium term, 2027, we do not have an economy which is broken beyond repairs?
More transparency and an assessment of, who has a good plan, to get us out of, the situation. It's as simple as that. So what I've done is to do the analysis as part of PFM Tax Africa. That is our consulting wing with some partners. We do some consulting. We also do some teaching. And what I can do is to, point to the fact, what is there. So I suppose this, with you in the lead, can start a conversation, about it. Because these are from official sources. They are not from my, it's not private, estimates which I did. They are from official sources.
Hello. Yeah, good afternoon, Honorable Seth. Revenue mobilization has been difficult for every government. Recently, the government wanted to introduce a new tax that was kicked against by Ghanaians. They are talking about yield levy that must be done away with. Legacy levy must be done away with. Now, in your capacity, if you are given that nod as the new Minister of Finance, what differently you do, as it were, to bring this situation under control? Because the government is like, is overstretched. It doesn't know what to do, as it were, to tackle the tax or the debt burden we face now. So in your capacity as Minister of Finance now, what differently are you going to do so that we can bring down the whole thing? And then the Vice President is saying that he's going to use digitalization to tackle the menace of corruption. Do you share the idea? Is it going to work? If not, why not?
I can only point to what we did which achieved some success, because there's some credibility in that. And then I can move on to maybe the future. You remember the very first, if not among the first law that was passed by the Mills administration was the Ghana Revenue Authority Act, 2009, the very year. And remember, the now late president was Commissioner of Internal Revenue. Earlier, he was the board chairman for Internal Revenue. I can say with confidence that those reforms were a continuation of discontinued reforms from the ERP SAP era, in which he played a role. And let me tell you why. Ghana granted the first autonomy to the National Revenue Secretariat, but Ghana never established a revenue authority. And my former boss, who I was in the National Revenue Secretariat, so this is something I know. My former boss, who was leading those reforms, was the one who left to Uganda and became the first Commissioner General for the Uganda Revenue Authority, which had then come out of the bush like Rwanda after the war and needed. From there, he went to Rwanda. Again, after the Civil War, he became the first Commissioner General, and then Ethiopia, and he came back home and became an advisor, to the government on these strategies. So whilst we delayed, because of the VAT, in continuing with the reforms, other countries were moving forward with the revenue administration, reforms. So revenue, and the trend is you create a revenue authority. We had removed IRS and SEPs from the civil service already and improved their conditions of service. But the next step was you don't establish, countries were moving away from, there's one tax agency that does income tax, another agency does VAT, another agency. And why were they moving away from it? When you file your tax returns, your VAT returns, which is monthly, VAT is based on purchases and sales, and then profits. And the difference is what you pay. The same invoice and purchase invoice and sales invoices are what you need in your income tax returns. So why do you have two departments? You send one tax auditor to go and do VAT, the same invoice, he leaves his mark, then IRS officer goes, he also goes, he sees the mark of his colleague, there's his, and then the owner of the business has to spend, 1/3 of the year attending to tax, and it continues to feed into the domestic tax systems. Does it have to be manual? Do you have to go and collect all those, which is what used to be done? Boxes of declarations at customs to send to the tax office to check whether somebody with a TIN or national identification number who imported is making the right declaration when it comes to payment of corporate income taxes. We call it automation. So you can call it digitalization. Westbury is digitalization. So why was it stopped? Why was ITax stopped? Because the next step was to link GRA, was to have the domestic tax automated system to link GRA so that the information on the declaration, the information on, because if let me be practical here. If I import with my TIN, which is supposed to be unique. That's what we call a unique tax identification number, which has become the national identification number. So GRA was using one unique tax identification number before national identification number came. In fact, the national identification number was initiated, as you know. So I'm talking about automation. We're talking about the same thing: automation, digitalization. And you can go way back. In fact, GCNet was automation. It's just that it didn't have those advanced tools which have come since, with mobile phones and everything. You can file your returns with a mobile phone. It's not every. So you bring the tax agency into the modern era. And that is why the retention for GRA was increased to 6%, so that I can have money to set up all those automated systems. That's why West Blue came on board. That's why. And then there were other reforms that were stalled. Remember, after GRA, VAT service and Internal Revenue Service were merged. It's not by accident. It is because now you need one agency to go and do, only one tax auditor to go and look at that invoice. And that tax auditor will be trained both for income tax and for VAT. But before he goes, he has his laptop. Where are their laptops today? Maybe we can pick something from education for tax. He has his laptop, which gives him a code, a right as a GRA employee to use the thing to check the audits that he's going to conduct. You know, this is what we're doing in the VAT service. I work in the VAT service. I was deputy commissioner before I left the country. You know, so VIPs, we call it VIPs. It was automated. So before the officers leave for the morning, they've downloaded the information about the taxpayer they're going to audit. Because the data, everything is stored. So customs alone, customs declaration with the VAT alone can tell you, you know, how much this guy imported. So you go there and then you compare the income tax against what he imported. That one, legitimate. It's legitimate. He won't complain. He will just make an arrangement to pay. You don't have to lock the shop. Locking a shop is for the recalcitrant. Yes, it's in the law. I've been a tax official. I'm not going to, you know, so I'm saying that continuity of reforms is important. And digitalization used to be called automation. That's all. It's automation. When I was in graduate school and everything, calling it automation. So I'm saying the reforms, you know, have to just continue, right? And the public servants, they know the reforms. They know if you give it a different name, it will go on. Now we link it to gift-based. And the same thing. Government expenditure is about 90% private. If you take contractors and the rest. So what is controller also doing? Is a fiscal system at the same Ministry of Finance. Why haven't we progressed to link ICOMS and the iTax, which is stored now, to, you know, the gift-based, so that you can use the thing to ask, right? So that was the path. So there was to be a revenue modernization phase 2 and a gift-based phase 2, right? We are being technical here, so I'm only giving now both parties saying they are going in that direction. But I can tell you, I'm only saying that there's a precedent. Ghana was pioneer, and we delayed in many of those reforms. Large taxpayer office, small taxpayer office, and those were some of the things I was doing missions when I was at the IMF. And that was a trend, and that's why, you know, we introduced them. So we'll have to go back. Those of you who are saying, what are you going to do? It isn't that we haven't done anything, and it isn't that this government hasn't done anything, but we need a comprehensive approach to what we are doing.
Okay, so we'll take the last two questions. So yourself and then Mr. Lulu again.
All right, thank you so much, Honorable, for bringing succinct clarity on issues raised so far as the Ghana's IMF program is concerned. My name is Joseph Kobla Wemako, and I write for I edit at newsghana24.com. It's an online platform. Permit me to take you a bit back in regards to conditionalities. I just want to find out if a country goes into IMF program, as far as conditionalities are concerned, is there a room for them to sit down and renegotiate on these issues, or that is the end? The reason why I'm asking this question is in regards to the recent VAT, 15% VAT imposition, which has sparked a huge public controversy or an uproar, even though it has been suspended. Now, going forward, what do you think government should do? What is the way out? Is there a way to sit down and renegotiate? How is it going to be solved? Thank you very much.
I think we must be realistic with ourselves. The VAT rate today is about 22.5 or 25% from my perspective. And let me tell you why. And there was a bit of politics involved in this whole VAT thing. We know it from Kumipreko to everything. You know, the VAT was introduced at 10% because of resistance, even though it was replacing sales tax and, you know, and service taxes. Right? It was replacing sales tax and service taxes. Then 10%, the sales tax was already had gone up to 17.5%. Already the base was narrow. And the service taxes, and the sales tax was already 15%. So the ideal thing was to increase it, was to introduce at about 15% because of the resistance and because, you know, I'm talking about the reintroduction of the VAT, right? One of the concessions that was made was for the rates to go down to 10. 10 was not sustainable. So the VAT rate was increased by 2.5%. And then this year at the time promised to dedicate it to education. And that's what they called the bluff and got the increase. Right? And that is why Get Fund, when you import and you are charged Get Fund as a business, you were allowed VAT input tax credit. It was collected as though it was a VAT. So the rate went to 12.5%. Then the Kufuor administration came. Remember, the rate is still unsustainable. Increase it by another 2.5% to 15%, right? And decided to dedicate it to health. National health insurance, therefore, like the Get Fund, was being collected as though it were a VAT. You are allowed input as credit because the tax is on the consumer. The tax is not on the business. The business is only an agent for collection. And so if the business pays tax and they produce and they are selling on to a wholesaler before it gets to, they must get their tax, you know, the taxes they paid on inputs back. Because the finest point for collecting the tax, like the sales tax, is at the retail stage. But the reason why the value-added tax approach was adopted was that the weakest link in any consumption tax system, including excise, is the consumer. I walk in, I'm not a businessman, so a businessman asks me, oh, I'm coming to eat in your restaurant. Okay, you want the VAT invoice? The amount is 20. You don't want the VAT invoice? It's 15. Okay, we are all patriotic, right? So which one will you choose? Many opt for 15. Right? Because the time the pocket is speaking, it's not patriotism, you know. Right? But the VAT, because it was collected incrementally from the port, from the importer, who would then the credit and get a refund, he passes it on to the manufacturer, who gets the refund, will get the credit, and then it removed the tax until it hits, or we collected the tax in stages until it gets to the final consumer. That is the strength of the VAT. Okay, so does it matter that you take the Get Fund and NHIL out of the tax base and call it straight levies, and then you deny the input tax and the refund mechanism? The businessman is rational. If you deny me, I add it to cost, and it only contributes to inflation. Or if the competition is too much, evasion and avoidance until I'm caught. That's why I'm saying that for me, the straight levy is a VAT. And it has only made it worse because the taxes that used to go back as input tax credit and as, refunds, especially for exporters, are now being added, to cost. Anyway, we set that aside. Of course, we introduced another 2.5% to take it from 15 to 17.5%. And the Ghana Infrastructure Fund was beginning to make sense. So we said, let's dedicate that for infrastructure development. You remember, the law itself says that we must create, so it was 17.5%. But at the time of creating the straight levy, then we said the VAT rate is 12.5%. It has become 12%. In substance, it's the same 17.5%. So if you add another, that's why I'm saying that if you add another 2.5%, it's the rate of VAT for me is, and the reason you have this is that that is the effective rate. And that is what we need to review. Why? Because you are distorting one of the potent, means of collecting tax. VAT is the widest base. If you want stability, like somebody was asking, how do we generate revenue? Stop distorting it. So what's e-levy? We introduced VAT on non-core financial services. Non-core financial services. And those who follow me on Twitter again, I've been explaining this. Now the VAT says that so long as you are selling a consumption good or service, you must pay tax. The consumer. So long as the consumer is buying services or goods and it's taxable and it's not exempt, right? It's taxable and not exempt. The one selling, that's a registered VAT business, should collect, VAT. Okay. Now, if you receive your pay and I receive my pay, and I decide to put my, old-fashioned way, because I'm old-fashioned, in my pocket, right? I mean, my friends here are younger, so they take their phone, and they are looking at me wasting time, and, they are keen to just, use a barcode to pay and move on. You earn 1,000, I earn 1,000. Mine is my pocket. We are in the same supermarket. If we are going to pay tax, let's all pay the VAT. Or because it's a new economy and a new service has come. Remember, if you go to an architect, right, you pay VAT on services. You go to an accountant. So what is it that says that if MTN is providing a service, right, there should be no VAT on the fee? Because VAT says that unless a commodity is exempted, right, unless a commodity is exempted, it must attract VAT, right? So new economy or no new economy, you are buying and selling. You are buying goods and services. But we are saying let's be careful, because the money in the bank is savings. It has already been taxed. So when you transfer, it shouldn't be the amount that you are transferring that should be the determining factor. It should be the service fee. Because you decide to go to ATM, I decide to take my wallet and pay. So you are being new economy. If we don't expand the tax to the new economy, the tax will be on the old economy. And that's why the law is defined that way. So when a new economy comes in, petroleum or whatever, you don't have to go to parliament. It's a tax which all consumers must pay. Who says that you go to parliament to enact a new law when Mr. X is being employed? And does it matter whether you are working? What difference does it make? You are an MTN, and there's no argument that you should pay income tax, new economy. But when it comes to VAT, and so I'm saying that my opposition to the e-levy and other is that, one, they are distorting the VAT regime, right? They are distorting the VAT regime. Two, because unlike VAT, you are not being given credits or input as credit. Or refund, sorry. Right? So, and that is the whole thing about VAT. To make the tax a true tax on the consumer and not on businesses who are collecting the tax and government is not paying them any fee anyway. Okay, so let's get it right. Now, having said that, we used to bring in temporary levies, particularly fiscal stabilization levy or national stabilization levy, doesn't matter how. Temporary import duty, anytime we went into an IMF program and the economy has a problem. That's when we introduced levies. Then we tie it to the IMF program, and after 3 years of the fund program, because we have done well and we are exiting, the tax must also exit. Those taxes have been added, they have been left. So most of the levies that we are taxing now, there used to be a service tax, there used to be a restaurant tax, there used to be so many taxes. In fact, there used to be a tax, sales tax on services on telephone. It used to be Ghana Telecom only when the VAT was introduced, right? Why communication service tax, why a new tax and whatever. All those taxes used to be in the VAT base. So you are distorting the tax base. And that's why we don't have time, I would have showed you. That's why the VAT is not bringing in money, and we are still stagnant. Well, IMF, you can always renegotiate. But they want to meet their revenue target. So if you want to renegotiate a revenue package on the fiscal side, and it will reduce revenue, and tell me whether you are going to cut your expenditure, whether you won't get your tranche money. You are sovereign, and you can add. In fact, if you go to the 2015 IMF program, you won't see the word sinking fund. We use debt repayment and others, because we added it to the program. You won't see stabilization fund, but we argued that this is in our law. You know, would they have been happy that you use that money to reduce the deficit because there are deficit institutions? Of course. And you meet their targets as quickly as possible. So as sovereign, that's the essence of the memorandum of understanding, letter of intent, your intention to go, which is tabled at the board, and the memorandum of understanding, the MOU, signed by the governor and the Minister for Finance on behalf of the government and peoples of Ghana. So you can always renegotiate. In fact, the negotiations or the staff reviews are about negotiations. Something is not going well, right? Maybe I said I'll do this, I didn't get the money to do it, so I renegotiate that away and then replace something. Maybe Defeat promised to do something for me, I didn't get the money, but I got something from GIZ to do another thing, which will enable me reach the same goal. Yeah, they are not, well, they are called a dogmatic institution, but they are not that dogmatic. Or too dogmatic. Mr.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank Mr. Terkper. Let's put our hands together for him. He's been standing for almost 2 hours, and we are so grateful to you. Well, he says he teaches. That's the reason why he can stand for hours on end. And in closing, ladies and gentlemen, we want to really appreciate your presence today, and we hope that this encounter has been one that, you know, you will be able to have a lot of stories, and if you have more questions to ask, what we would say is that when we are done, Mr. Seth Terkper has some 15 to 20 minutes to still answer some of your questions. And so our media friends who would want to still ask some few questions, he is around for the next 20 minutes to answer those questions for you before you leave. We need to come to the point where we must appreciate the fact that in moving forward as a country, transparency in communication has to be central in our strategy. It has to be central in our strategy. It's important that we do that. And so we hope that, you know, the government and all others who are the helms of affairs will learn to be transparent, will learn to open the books to us so we can ask all the questions and understand the things that we need to do. We are so grateful for you for making time and joining us today. Obviously, you know that sometimes we have the hybrid sessions where if Mr. Terkper is not around or our speakers are not around, we try to, you know, get you on Zoom so that we can still communicate with you. Obviously, after the next program review by the IMF, we will meet you again. And again, after the media budget review, we'll come back and let you know what our thoughts are as far as PFM Tax Africa is concerned. You know that PFM Tax Africa is a non-profit think tank that looks at everything as far as our fiscal policy, as far as policies that affect us with regards to the economy is concerned. And we are grateful to you for making time and joining us today. Carry the good news to the people of Ghana. Let them understand what the situation is. Let them understand the reviews that we have done, and that will help all of us to move the nation forward. Until we meet again, thank you for making time. As I said, Mr. Seth Terkper has some 20 minutes. Those of us who still have questions that have not been answered, he would stand in front of our pull-up banner there and then answer those questions for you. Thank you very much.